Hey,
Let's switch so we can
hey,
see
Kirk.
him.
Hey guys.
Cole, can you hear us?
Yeah,
All
yeah, I
right,
hear
so
everyone good.
let me introduce you guys real quick. We've looked at a bit of his work earlier. Let me fix the lights too. How do we have it before? Was it dark in the back and a little? Is
Yeah, dark in the back and a little in the front.
that good?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So Kirk does all sorts of stuff. He's a great designer, really good illustrator, makes some amazing icons, and has a couple different jobs. Right, works full time nominally for a SaaS-based company out of Canada. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's sort of his main gig, but has also done some really cool illustration projects for like UPS. Did some really cool stuff for Google when they sort of made the push on what used to be the Google Now app and is now I think just called the Google app for
Yeah,
iPhones.
yeah.
And a couple other really cool things. Most recently, and I think we're going to talk a bit about tonight, is with Donors Choose, which is a really cool nonprofit that Oprah has a huge love affair with, but that was really ugly until Kirk got to it. Uh, so, with that, dude, I'll let you go ahead and get started, and we'll go from there.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, cool. Hi guys. I I'm briefly prepared to talk to you about icons. Like Jeremy said, of all different types. So, starting kind of with icons. To me, icons, and Jeremy and I talked about this a little bit earlier. You know, icons are so broad. I mean, you have the icons at the bottom of your iPhone and Instagram app and all that stuff, which are those really abstract icons, which don't really have any text next to them and stuff like that. And a lot of the icons that I am working with are more illustration based, a little bit more detail, usually accompanied with text, which to me I'm really thankful for because it lets you get a little bit more abstract with what you're doing because you have those little header text next to you, whether it's an icon for a feature for a software or um, anything really. I mean, you may have a paragraph of text next to it, you may have just a heading next to it, but oftentimes, you have something. So what I wanted to do today was spend a little bit of time kind of going over the process of the way I've done a lot of mine, and I've done a lot of different types, which is good for this because I'd like to show you sort of how to be dynamic with what you're doing as well, because clients aren't going to always come to you with the idea of like the same thing over and over again. So you kind of have to rise to those occasions depending on what the client wants or what the client needs or what the client might not necessarily know that they need, but what you think is best. So I've got a few different styles, one including a tattoo that I did recently, which kind of really can relate to an iconic style. Um, so cool. So what I'm going to do here is you'll say goodbye to my face for a moment, I think. And I think what I'll do is share my screen, and Jeremy will let me know if you can see this list of gibberish.
Yep, you're up.
Okay. So it's not, you guys don't have to really read it or anything like that. It's mainly for me. But basically, I kind of brought these icons, or the idea of the way I get started with an icon, into 5 sections. And it's not the end-all be-all list of anything, but it starts when a client will email me or whatever. I kind of start interviewing the client and seeing just generally what this is going to be. Where are these icons going to live? Are they going to be on a website? Are they going to be on an app? Are they going to be printed? Are they going to be on someone's skin? There's all different types of things like that. So we kind of figure out the most basic stuff with like, are they going to have text around them? Are they going to have a lot of text, small amount of text, no text at all? What is the culture of the site? Is it an old Western site? I know that you guys are doing kind of these themed websites, so you need to always make sure, of course, that the icons are fitting the mold of everything. How big are they going to be? How small are they going to be? It depends a lot on the detail. If you're going to have some of them really big in certain areas, really small in other areas, you might have to end up designing them almost twice in sort of a responsive layout of an icon. So that's kind of that interviewing the client level of abstraction. So that's basically, the more.
Hey, Kirk.
Yes.
Hey, real quick, can you kind of go over like what's the relationship between having text near an icon and how abstract you can make it?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll show you guys. Well, here, well.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you
No. I need as much help as I can get. But for me, like I always am, I take a breath of air when they're telling me that these icons are going to be next to a lot of text, because to me that means, okay, these icons can be a little bit more abstract. They can be, you know, if it's something like a team building icon, that's something that's pretty difficult to create and be fun without just like having two people shaking hands, or two, you know, silhouette circle people with their arms around each other's shoulders or something like that. But if you have, you know, if it's going to be on the website and it says, you know, team building, our company is all about, you know, doing the best team building and all this gibberish next to it, then you know, all right, well, I can have some fun with the icon. I can make it a little bit more abstract, which is the word I keep coming back to, a little bit more whatever, and more styled, more big, more small, whatever. I have a lot more freedom because I have that text next to it, and that will help explain what it is. So they kind of look to the left, they see, all right, that might be, I don't know, maybe team building, maybe not. They look to the right, they see team building. It kind of more reinforces that text next to it, and it accompanies it more than it would have to stand only on its own. So to me, those are my favorite types of things, is if I have a little bit of text next to it, which is lazy, but it's nice to be able to have that freedom because you have the text next to it.
I see what he's saying. Like, if the icon has to do all of the heavy lifting, right? We have to make sure that the meaning is communicated clearly, right? So the icon itself can't be nearly as kind of like complex or, you know, sort of supporting the message, right? So you have to make sure that they understand the icon, sort of bar none. However, when you have text there that already describes there, that gives you some hint or that supports the image, you're able to do some more interesting things with the icon, because in concert they sort of serve to carry the meaning with them. You guys see what I'm saying? So when we're applying this to your sites, there may be certain situations, for example, on the retail site, where we're going to use an icon to contain the entirety of the meaning, right? For a cart, for example. But on some of the other ones, maybe with an agency, one of the agency sites, or with the portfolio site, we might pair it with text and take a little more liberty in the icon. So I'm pretty sure he said it exactly the same way, and I've just repeated it, but just in case, it's sort of, I think, what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Totally. And it's always like very different depending on so many different things, and that's kind of why it's all part of that, like interviewing the client, so to speak, and just figuring out what you're doing. And then kind of moving on, and this is a lot the same, but kind of once you get that information, you learn, all right, well, now that I know all this stuff, you get to know like what's the level of detail that I'm going to be able to include, where are they going to live, all that type of stuff. And then, of course, the next is like moving on to the budget and time, which inevitably always comes into play, and it always becomes some sort of an issue. Almost, 99% of the time, they don't have as much money or as much, they can't buy as much time from you as you want them to. So you have to kind of keep things smart. So like, you always want to be designing, and I'm sure Jeremy is really good about this, but like, you always want to design with like smartness, and that's not in like it sounds so rude to say like make sure you're smart when you're doing what you do, but like just keeping layers smart, keeping them vector, keeping things as non-destructive as possible, because you want to be able to reuse things, reuse elements. It's kind of like, I call it like a trickle-down design, in that you design up top really well, and then all the icons that follow that first icon kind of build themselves based around these parameters, whether you saying, every icon's going to be in a circle, or every icon's going to be in a triangle, or every icon's going to use this type of a shadow or this color. And you put these parameters around the project, and that helps you figure out how much time you're going to spend on each one.
Hey, Kirk.
Sure.
You had a really hard-working dad, right?
Yes.
Did he ever tell you to do it right the first time?
Yeah, measure twice.
Fact.
Yeah.
We're related.
Like the icon game, in fact, like the design game in general, if it seems like a waste of time to label your layers, to keep them organized, to follow a system, it will make like all of the sense in the world to you, and you'll be so much happier you wasted 30 seconds when 2 weeks later a client's like, hey, can you change this color or round this corner, and you don't have to play like this mouse over game. They're like, oh, now I have an outline. Is that it? No, that's not it. That's the clipping mask they use. All right, well, let me lock this and go to the layer underneath. That's not it. Let me control click. Oh, that's not it. That's a pattern layer. oh, here it is. Here's the purple diamond I need to round the corners on. It's on the same layer. It's under 6 objects. I sure wish someone had told me, do it right the first time, and I wouldn't be having this issue.
Yeah, it's measure twice, cut once. And it's totally, yeah, it really is true. I mean, because people say, you may hear like, oh, well, you just charge a client for revisions or whatever, but it's like it never works that way. And you always end up pulling your hair out, and you're always wishing that you stayed organized the first time. Or you like, I'll open up a document real quick and like make a change and then be like, oh, do you want to save your changes? And I'm like, no, why do I need to do that? And then I have to make another revision. It can stink really quick. So it's way better to measure twice and cut once. Absolutely.
One other thing real quick, like you just did some work for Blue Conic, right? What did they originally hire you for?
They hired me, yeah. They hired me originally just for icons and illustrations, relatively involved, but just only stills.
Right.
And what they ended up doing was they liked them so much that they asked me to animate them, which I've always said, like, I don't tell them, oh, you're lucky that I do it this way, but I kind of say, yeah, that would be easy for us to do because I've built them in such an intelligent way that all the layers are separate, all of them are grouped properly, all of them are labeled properly, named properly. Usually if I draw something behind something, even if it's going to not be shown, I'll try to draw, if it's going to be a person with their hand behind their leg, I'll still draw that hand, because you never know if they want to animate them later or do something with them later, then you can pull that hand up and wave without having to draw it. Or if it's all on one layer, of course, you wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So that actually helped me make 3 times the amount of money on that project in about half the time, because I labeled everything and did it all properly the first time. It was really easy for me to animate it later.
So when you do a good job, you get more work. And when you do the job right and get more work, you can get more money for less work. Like less effort, right, is what you're saying?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Hey, animate this. We're going to pay you as though you are doing it from scratch, but you don't have to do it from scratch because you did it right the first time. So you're like paying yourself more than you normally would to do something because you'd already done it the right way.
Yeah, and once you get in the habit of doing it, it's like, I don't know, I come from a computer science background and logic and all that stuff, so I really like organizing. But once you start doing it, it becomes really easy and kind of fun, even just to organize your stuff and keep it tidy. And it makes it easier halfway through, too. If you do it from the start, it makes it easier even while you're building it, not even for revisions. So, yeah, it's definitely really good to keep it clean.
Sorry I hijacked you.
No. I need it. So then there's design rules. Once you kind of, you're basically just collecting data and all that stuff, figuring out your parameters, and then you're starting to set it up of like, all right, what is it going to be? Are we going to use, green? Are we going to use blue? Are we going to use all these different colors? Are we going to use them with nice strokes? Are they going to be fills? Are they going to be shadows? Are they not? So you kind of want to give yourself, because they're icons, they're a part of a family, you want to give them something that unites them, right? So like in my family, a lot of us have orangey blondish hair. So like the same with these icons, whether it be everything's going to be in a hexagon shape, or everything's going to be breaking out of the left side of a square, or they're going to be using blue, there's always one common thing. And that's what helps make them a family. And then finally, and I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end, but the tech requirements of it when you're delivering, what's going to make the most sense? Are they going to be SVG, scalable vector graphics from Illustrator? Are they going to be raster graphics from Photoshop? Are they going to have a lot of texture on them? Are they going to be really clean? How are they going to be built? Are you going to want to use a font face type like Font Awesome? So there's all these different types of things. What's going to happen when they hover the icon? Are they going to change a different color? Are they not? Are they going to be, do they need to be seen on Retina? If they're on a Retina MacBook display, they're going to have to be twice the size. All those types of things. So that's when you really start thinking how you're going to deliver these things best for your client, because there's nothing worse than and it's happened a lot, if you deliver these things and they didn't know what they wanted or they didn't ask for it right, and then they put them up and it looks like crap, and then it's not fun for anyone, because the best thing that can happen to your project is it goes live and everybody enjoys it. But if it comes out crappy, then nobody enjoys it, and you get your money, but it's not worth it. So yeah, those are the things. And then now what I plan to do before I ask for questions is I want to show you, I've got 3 or 4 sets of icons that I was going to go through and kind of roughly try to match up to this process and show you guys kind of from sketch, into Illustrator, into Photoshop, whatever, and how they kind of get built out, and then trying to show you these 5 steps in that. So are there any questions on these 5 steps so far?
That makes sense to everyone? Like, pretty straightforward, right? Sort of like the general process stuff we've talked about. Like, you have to sort of build, your parameters and sort of fill them in with information and research. Yeah, I think we're probably ready to see the good stuff, right?
All right.
Yeah, so go for it, dude.
Okay, cool. So you guys still now you see folders and stuff, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So first one that I think will make sense to talk about is probably Donors Choose. And this is a project that we just talked about. That was the Oprah one. That was these icons were going to be very significant to the whole entire brand. They were redoing their whole entire brand, and these illustrated icon, badge, whatever you want to call them, ended up being really important. And this is kind of, I know it's small. Let me do this and go big. So this is the final product of them. And obviously the first thing I kind of did was learn about what they needed, what the look was. They're using orange as their main broadcast flagship color. The site was going to be on a white background. It was going to be generally clean. Their biggest issue with their brand and their website and all that stuff at the time was that it was really clunky. There was a lot of steps to everything. Even the checkout process was like 16 steps. So they wanted to really tidy everything up and make it look a lot cleaner, a lot nicer. They also wanted to make sure they were going to look nice on mobile, look nice on a Retina display. They were going to use them for a lot of different purposes. They're thinking about printing them on badges, stickers, things like that. So just a little tiny background on what they do is, I think if you think of Kickstarter, but for teachers and schools, and they were actually around, I think, like 14 years before Kickstarter, but basically a teacher comes on and says, we need iPads for our kids, or we need money to buy tickets to get them to go to the zoo or whatever. So they come on and they ask for that. So what they wanted was they needed these 9 or 10 or however many badges there are for different subjects. And so basically, like, you come onto the site and you want to browse, you want to fund a science project if you really like science or art or whatever. So this is kind of the final product, and you can see that they all share some commonalities. The difference is the color, but they all have a primary element and 2 secondary elements. They all kind of break out of the top of their hexagon, or however many sides this is. They all have a general obvious style, just with strokes and stuff like that. Going down with some music. This was an ambiguous one. It was, I think, special needs, art, world, and travel, stuff like that. So they all have different color, but similar in a lot of ways. And you see, as I kind of break them down, I start ditching color. I start ditching, if we went smaller again, maybe we would ditch these secondary elements. But we would still make sure this primary element holds to value as it gets smaller. And like, see, I started ditching because of the white. I got rid of the lines in the graph and stuff like that. So it's important to think moving forward, like, how are these going to break down for small sizes if you're going to need them for small sizes? Maybe they'd say, this is the only size we're ever going to need them for, design them based around that. For this, I knew that he was saying, we're going to use them for a myriad of different things. So I built them with that in mind. So after we talked about it and stuff, we kind of were like, all right, well, let's start with science. That's kind of what we did here. And you guys are creative, so you can turn your heads. But basically, it all starts with sketches, and the sketches are always really, really crude and really bad. But what they do is they help you get, your ideas out there and stuff like that. And we were going to go with like a Bunsen burner. But we went the Erlenmeyer flask instead. But just playing with different shapes, how do circles line up, and how do, more of the triangle shape line up in these badges, and what's going to tie them all together. And then just the same for everything. And Because of the clean nature of these, a lot of the sketching was kind of skipped just because I kind of just needed to know what I was going to draw, and then I knew I was going to use really basic shapes to carry it out as simply as possible. So certain things like the violin, I had to make sure I drew first because you can't just start building it. But other things like the globe, maybe weren't necessary, or the book, it's pretty much just a square and a bookmark and stuff like that. So that was kind of like that data collection of knowing what it is, why they need it, what's going to make them unique, stuff like that. And then I started diving into this guy and going with science and just played and just went with tons of different types, all different sorts of things.
Real quick on this, like when you guys see this, can you make it just slightly larger? Is there any way we can get on 9 on one view? I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, the opposite of what I said. Like when you guys look at this, right? We have 12 icons here. Are you going to kick any of these icons out of bed, right? Like they're all pretty solid. They look good. They communicate the subject matter, right? Like, how do you go from this, Kirk?
Yeah.
Like how do you keep working, right? Like obviously, there's not like a perfect solution in your mind. You're playing with color, right? We have some interesting sort of like, this one's a little more muted. We have a couple different elements. We have some more contrast in the colors themselves. But like for you guys, and I know this happens with me, like sometimes I'll come up with one of these and be like, awesome, nailed it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's something that Kirk and I were talking about earlier. Like, you're gonna have a good idea, especially once you get more practice, like pretty early on in the process, right? Like even when you look at his sketches, you see some part of the final just in the sketch, right? It's there like right out of the gate. But and as good as these are, I think you guys will agree that the final's better, right? And so that's sort of like one of the big reasons I wanted to have Kirk talk to us, especially though, is because he does this better than just about any designer I know, right? Has some cool ideas in the sketch, has some really cool ideas once we've committed one style to vector, and this is the only one you did all these explorations for, right?
Yeah, this was the main one that really got dug into.
We saw 20 sketches. We're seeing 12 more actual vector examples. And then after this, you sort of, I think that you probably have more to show, but I just wanted to stop and kind of like point out to you guys that like this is how like a legit process yields a really like exceptional result. And so it's sort of mundane or like excessive as it can seem to like keep punching through, even though you have a solid idea, or even though you think you have a good direction. The fact that you want to keep sort of teasing it out until you've come up with enough ideas that you kind of can put together and work with like elements that really shine, right? So like whether it's the bubbles or the shape of the flask itself, or even some of this, like this idea where we start working in different symbols, like that starts to inform the next iteration, which really reinforces the science thing and kind of ends up in the final product really doing like a lot of heavy lifting. But sorry, dude.
No, yeah, that's like spot on. So, and not something I was going to talk about because I didn't even think of it. So that's perfect. Yeah. So what we did, like, we drilled on these for a long time, and I just want to see if I have a different. Yeah. So I have even more science stuff. So it really started like dirty, and then it was really a matter of like exploring all these different types. And just really just continue to drive it, and realizing quickly that this is not going to work. And so yeah, I guess this was the next slide I should have shown, but yeah, so we got here, and I didn't bring it to the client yet, but I did know that he liked more of the mono weight stroke stuff, so I took some of this guy, this guy, this, and brought it to him, and that's when I kind of came back to, say, these ones. And I brought these to the client and got his feedback. And the reason I brought him to them in such an early stage was because he was the art director of the company. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't going to be confused by why I'm sending him so many things. He wasn't going to be turned off by the fact that they're not polished and perfect. He understands process and stuff like that. So that was a really great thing for me to know, that he was open to all that stuff. So we went through them together and we talked about like, how is this going to work? Why is this not going to work? And we like the idea of like, all right, well, maybe these two things could be secondary elements that work at a big size. Is green or blue a better color? Should the stroke be that color? Or should it be filled in? All that type of stuff. So what we did was we just kind of looked at it really objectively. How are these going to scale down? How are they going to do all these different things? Are they going to have enough weight on the page at certain times? Because there's certain times where you want them to be the primary element on the screen. There's also times that you want them to be really subdued. And so that was another thing to be important of, like, they're not too heavy, not too thin. And that's kind of why we started getting rid of the filled-in guys. Because I really liked this one, but it was going to be too heavy on the page. So for this example, we just kind of went to the art director and just kept working with it and seeing what he liked. And he kind of dug, like, obviously he liked this. He liked the idea of the hex or whatever, however many of these are, and that stuff. So it took a lot of exploring to get there. And then we ended up, I have a few more process kind of here of like, now that we had this was at the time, this was what we went forward with, which obviously, again, kind of changed by the end of it all. But this was sort of the tentative final for science. So I said, all right, well, let's just bring it forward and start working on art. So we have Play-Doh, we have paint thingies, we have Play-Doh that's open with Play-Doh shooting out, we have rainbows shooting out. And again, so like these didn't go too far in the sketch phase, but I still consider vector sketching, right? So I'm just playing with shapes, I'm tipping things over, I'm rotating them at horizontals, I'm rotating them 90 degrees, I'm tipping them, doing all that stuff. I'm doing the same thing with, this was for sports. And so I start putting them all up next to each other too to try to see like how are these going to start working together? Are they going to break out of a different side on each one? And I quickly realized like, nah, it's going to be really tough. So maybe they all got to break out of the top. That will make more sense. Or maybe some stay contained, some don't break out. And so that was a lot of exploring, finding out what's going to work, what's not going to work. And you can see even here, like, this camera was too intricate to be a secondary element. I'll show you guys, I'm sure you forget by now, but we used a simpler camera here. This changed a lot. A lot of them changed over time. This wasn't going to scale down very well. It was kind of useless. That's the other thing about icons is like, if it doesn't really serve a huge purpose, let's get rid of it. That's the point of the icon, right? It's just to iconify, to symbolize, to represent something, but not completely drive it. So we got rid of a lot of stuff. And this is what I mean by vector sketching. These are ugly, but they all start. I guess I was going to have a man at one point. I don't even remember that. But so yes, those were all those kind of sketches that ended up coming out to the final, which now after you've seen that, maybe you see here. So there's some revisions. And these went through a lot of revisions because they were art directed by the creative director of the company. So he was really picky, but it worked really well. It was a good relationship. But it's, I think to drive that point is like, it takes a lot of revisions and a lot of different tries. And the first one, like my first science ones were done to me. Like whatever one of these science ones, like this one to me, I was like, that's fine, that's done. And I kind of slept on it, woke up, and I was like, it's all right, but it's not perfect. And and I knew that, again, going back to the budget and the time, I knew that they had money, they had time, they wanted something good, they wanted something great. And so I knew, all right, well, these aren't exactly what they need. So that's when we drove it further. But, I think everyone can relate with, like, the first thing you do, it's like sometimes you're just like, this is fine, let's just go with it. And I'm guilty of it often, but in this case, we just kept driving it harder. And if you do it again, it's going to get better almost always.
I should probably point out real quick, too, that, like, I saw a lot of those in those stages and was like, yeah, dude, ship it.
Done.
Ship it. Stop. Pencils down. Ship it. And, like, I'm lucky enough to be able to bounce stuff off of Kirk, and I guess he's lucky enough for me to praise everything he sends me. The most productive conversations, especially for me with my work, is, like, really getting, like, does something feel off, right? Like, that's that's like really when the good stuff happens. Is you'll get a screenshot or you get a draft or a revision, and it'll come like, hey, what's off? What's wrong in this? Right? Like if you approach it with that mindset, right? Like sleeping on it is an amazing idea. You come at it with fresh eyes, and something, if it's wrong, it will like scream at you. Where the night before, after you've been staring at it for 6 hours, like it might not make any sense. But it's important, excuse me, to like also really like have a process for how you evaluate your own work. Because like I said, he's sending it to me, and ostensibly I have some idea of like what it should look like or what good design works, or how good design works. But without having, for example, like the particulars about how the client is, like how like super control-ish that guy ended up being, even though it was for the best. Like it's hard for me to say. Like I see it, and I'm like, yeah, this is rad, looks awesome. That done. It's important too for us to try and offer criticism or try and offer feedback that's like legitimately actionable. Because like every time I end up saying that, I end up going, oh, that's stupid feedback, way to go. I'm like, yeah, it looks awesome, sick. That happens a lot. I'm like, that's sick. Even though I don't say that out loud ever. So when I say it now, I feel ridiculous. But I type it a lot. But like, it's really important if someone's like trusting you, like with something that they're working on, that you do them like the kindness of like actually considering it, because that can help accelerate some of these processes, right? Like maybe instead of 100 sketches, like it cuts it down to 50. But like it's something that we can do for each other that really helps like make better work and have like better results. Now I did absolutely nothing to help this process except be like, done, next, every single time. But,
I don't think that that's true, but it is true that feedback is always like, if you can't take feedback, you're not going to progress, and if you can't give feedback, then you're not really being that helpful. So, but that's not the case. He's always has a very objective eye to these things, and it's good to ask. Like you send it, and you're like, hey, what is wrong with this? Rather than being like, hey, what do you think of this? If you take that kind of negative approach to it, they're more open to like being like, all right, I'm going to tear this thing apart, and that's good because feedback you should always take, but you don't have to take either. If you disagree with it, that's fine too. But yeah, it's definitely a matter of like getting feedback from people and just seeing what's weird about it. And that's what the art director did a lot with this, because he wanted it to be perfect. So that's one. I know that took a while. I can keep going through a couple more. I'll try to be a little bit more timely.
You see a few other examples? He is the guy that did the Zelda thing. Yeah, that's it. You're the Zelda guy, just in case it's too low.
There's a Zelda. Yeah, those are kind of similar in style. I don't have a whole lot of sketches, but these are those Zelda icons that I did. These came pretty much out of mind, and for me, these were for a personal thing. They actually started from the Hylian shield or whatever. I was doing a security icon for WagePoint, which is a payroll company. And obviously my mind immediately went here, and without trying to get anybody sued, I changed it a little bit, but ended up revisiting it and wanted to just do some fan art of Zelda. So obviously here, it's obvious, right? Like the colors are what unify it, the general style, the stroke width, all the weight of the strokes are all the same. Everything is at the same, nothing is different. There's only one color difference, and that's the yellow in the middle. Obviously that's a personal kind of stylistic approach to it, but there is a lot of logic to, I guess, the way these came to be. And again, I kind of skipped those first steps just because it was for myself, but these all certainly belong to a family. They certainly all could stand on their own pretty well, but that's because of the pop culture reference to it. Like, I think normally, if you guys, and maybe most of you don't, maybe none of you know what the heck I'm talking about, maybe don't even know what Zelda is. Too bad. But this is generally a sword, right? Like, and this is a gem of some sort, or a diamond, or something like that, right? So they're kind of standing on their own. This is some sort of hook shot, grapple hook, maybe a weapon, something like that. This is tough, but it's a slingshot, right? And what I've tried to do is really, really minimize down to what I think is the essentials. And certain things like whether this is made out of wood or not, I don't need to show that because everything else stands on its own as the bow of light. Same thing. I think this is the best example. The slingshot is the best example of really taking something relatively intricate and breaking it down to something reasonably simple. And things like I wanted to show that this was a string or an elastic or some sort of rope, but I didn't want to just do a straight line because that wouldn't do it. So why not take that iconic representation of a string being kind of bouncy. So yeah, that was this guy, and I don't think I have any sketches of it, but that was another one I did. I just finished the Metroid stuff. This has some sketches to it too. So these were some icons I did for another personal piece, Super Metroid, minimal essentials of. And that starts with a whole slew of ugly sketches, right? And kind of coming up with what I want to have, what I is going to work, isn't going to work. Trying to draw them relatively simply. Going through, getting a general idea for composition, stuff like that, and then bringing these into Illustrator, and you can start tracing once if they're your own sketches. Feel free to trace. Like that's the best way to do it. And that's the nice feeling is like if you've done a sketch on your own and it's yours, then you can really start tracing it. And I wanted it to have that similar family as the Zelda stuff, and so I kept it around for reference material. And I can't say that this went through a ton of revisions, but that's a lot because there was no client other than myself, and when I'm working for myself, I'm not very picky because I just want to get things done. But so those two are pretty similar to the Donor's Tree stuff. Something that's maybe this leads to a different point. These icons, again, similar in style, and I'm looking like a one-trick pony. I got to show you some of that's a little different eventually, but these icons I did for WagePoint, which is a company that I work for now full-time as a creative director over there. So I'm in charge of pretty much anything that's visual, anything that people are going to feel, touch, look at, click on, things like that.
Hey, do you mind if we maybe just try and guess a couple?
Yeah, please.
So keeping in mind that all of these accompany some text, right? Normally a headline.
Almost every one of them will have some sort of headline underneath them, yes.
So let's just in the top row, right? What do we see? What's the first one, right? Credit card, right? Next to that we have what, some sort of measurement, percentage, right? Pie chart. The one next to that is a new message thing.
Yep.
Right, and this is sort of that interior icon on its own. What about this one? This one I think is really, really clever. So your fingerprint scan, right? A security thing. Obviously have some health and benefit stuff, an information one, the shield we were talking about, right? Calculator, sort of bookmark thing. This guy's Digit. He's their mascot, which I really love him, and you see him everywhere on their site. But then you have some more interesting ones. What was the Abacus one that goes the one in the fourth row? What does the Abacus one go with?
That was something along the lines of we had features and it's payroll software. So one of our things was something along the lines of we don't get things wrong. Our calculation, and it was cheeky of course because well it's not the best of technology for calculating, but it was something along the lines of our calculations are absolutely perfect every time. Something so that. That
one and the fingerprint one to me. So keep in mind that icons are an extension of the brand, right? And this is the brand that's represented by Digit. It's a funny robot, but it's payroll. It's the least exciting sort of thing in the world. But it's things like that Abacus, which do have there's a bit of cheek to it, right? It's not super straightforward. It's not slapstick funny. But when you take it with the text, right, which helps describe kind of why it's there, and you understand that how the brand behaves in general, these icons come from it. So we've done some branding exercises. We've talked quite a bit about what your companies might behave like, and this is kind of what happens to icons once you've made that investment in understanding what your archetype is, or in their situation, understand the brand well, what you're trying to do, right? They're trying to present this sort of friendly, open, professional, professional friendly kind of thing, right? Like polo shirt on Friday is like kind of what WagePoint's all about without being like super stuffy or hard to relate to as a payroll company. And I think when you look through these icons, you get that feeling, right? There's a real kind of human feel to them, even though like literally what the company does is tell you how much money to pay people, right? Like it's not, it's not like this feel-good enterprise. It's like, give us some money, we'll tell you who to give money, everyone saves money, that's what we do. But I think it's interesting, I think it should help us understand how something as small as a 75 by 75 pixel abacus relates back to like the whole core of what WagePoint offers and why they're in business and like sort of what the personality of the brand are supposed to be, So
yeah, and it's interesting because we do actually get a good amount of compliments from new customers, people that onboard and kind of say like, we really love the way things look, or we were drawn to the thing by the way it looks and it feels, or we love the icons, or we love that robot. What's the deal with the robot? And so it matters too. Like your product needs to be great, of course, but like the way you market your product and the way your .com works and the way you present yourself as a brand, it does matter, and it does get you money, and it does get you success and those types of things. And it's really important to carry that forward with a brand. And with this, to add to the point is there's obviously a decent amount of icons here. When I put them all in front of us, it doesn't look like it's a crazy amount, but I mean, there's got to be whatever, 60 here or something like that. It's kind of daunting so WagePoint's a startup, so we don't have a ton of money, we don't have a ton of help, we don't have a lot of stuff. I'm the only creative on the team. There's a lot of work to be done. There's product design, there's website design, there's printing business cards for other employees, there's brochures, stickers, promotional swag, making t-shirts, making icons, making everything, and it's all on me. So I quickly realized when making these icons, I was making these more intricate ones, and I was also just deciding what they were going to be as I started making them. It was just like, what's this one going to look like? Now, what's this one going to look like? What's this one going to look like? And so very quickly I was like, no, hold on, I need to make a template for these things. And that goes back to that trickle down, and I don't even know if that's a good term, but that's that trickle down design where like if I create one icon really nicely with a great deal of hierarchy and all these properties, then I can do that to everything, and it will carry that brand forward, so they'll all look the same. It'll be easy to keep making them, because now, honestly, like, if I need to make a laptop, all I do is take a square, another square, a heart, add a little shadow, some dashes, and it looks great, right, because it matches all the other ones. It has that money feel, it has that tech feel, it has that clean feel, that human touch, all that very easily. So leading to that measure twice, cut once, this was very much an example of measure twice, cut once, because I made sure that this template was going to work. And now moving forward, until these aren't cool anymore in 2016 or whatever, when it's all about whatever else, these are going to work. I'm going to be able to make icons very quickly, and that way I can work on the things that kind of matter a little bit more. That's, product design and stuff like that, getting new business.
Would you mind going over the tattoo?
Yeah, of course.
A little bit, because I don't want to keep you too long.
No, I don't mind.
I also want to make sure that you guys can ask whatever you want. Actually, do you want to do tattoo, or do you want to do image UI? Or whatever, actually, it's Spanish or something.
Is it Spanish or something? I don't know what it is.
I don't know. It might not actually be Spanish at all, but they speak Spanish. It's up to you. So there's two things left for us to look at. One of them is a totally different kind of product, but in a similar style. And one of them is a totally different style, but the same kind of product. You guys have. Well, let's look at the image stuff first. So before, we'll like have you finish up with the tattoo.
Yeah. So these were done. I was approached by a Spanish-speaking client, but I think that they realize that, what is it, 1 out of 5 people right now are of Latino descent, and they're very quickly growing, and like there's a huge market in the U.S. for them. So it's a U.S. product, but in Spanish and stuff like that. So that was an interesting thing with like localization, right? So like these icons need to I can't design them with English in mind. I can only design them with what she's describing them to me as. And she speaks English, no problem. There's no issue or barrier there. But it's thinking like, okay, these need to be very easy to understand. But she also wanted them to be very fun. She loves the texture. She loves the wonky shapes, the weird lighting. And that's kind of that other style that I do a lot of. And it's weird shapes, weird perspectives, and stuff like that. So she wanted me to do that. So this probably not obviously. So the other thing is these were accompanied. I think I actually have a screenshot of, yeah. So this will be helpful. They were accompanied with their text underneath. So collaboration, teamwork, voting, comments, and a wide audience. And so knowing that I had this underneath made the project so much easier for me because I could really wonk these things out and make them pretty weird, where maybe normally they're not very obvious, especially something like the eyeball or even these guys. You know, none of them are super great on their own, but luckily I knew that they weren't going to use them anywhere else. They weren't going to use them as a Twitter avatar. They weren't going to use them as a logo or even anywhere outside of these 4 images. And that's something that you kind of ask at first is like, what's the range of this? What, you know, what are you going? Where are these going to be? Are they going to ever be accompanied with, without text? Are they going to be big? Are they going to be small? All the stuff that we've talked about a trillion times. But knowing that, I was able to have a lot more fun with it, and that was very much the idea of the site and the product, was to have it be kind of weird and fun. So that was a good example of being able to go a little bit outside of normal because you have that text next to it. And yeah, these are those sketches of that guy. It's kind of all I had. I think this was kind of quick turnaround and stuff like that, and I kind of knew what I wanted, so sketches were pretty quick. Obviously, I kind of used this one, went forward with it, and because it's a style that I'm really happy and familiar with, this kind of weirdness, it's something that I can work with in Illustrator pretty quickly. It doesn't require a whole lot of sketching because it's just a matter of you just keep clicking and clicking and clicking until you got the shape you want, and then you just paint a bunch of texture all over it. So yeah, that was an interesting project and different. I'm glad that you guys get to see that I can do at least one other thing.
For the tattoo, will you give us kind of the brief, like what the guy was looking for before we start looking at what you did for it?
Yeah. So let me. Am I back yet? Okay. So I get a good amount of these tattoo commissions on this like minimal style, and it's basically I did one for myself, and it was very minimal, if you will. It's similar to these kind of icons of, you know, strokes and one color and stuff like that. And, the reason I did that was because I wanted to design the tattoo myself for myself, but I knew I wouldn't be able to do that really nice painterly style with a lot of shading and edging and kind of like the, you know, pirate ships and flags and old scripts and stuff like that. So I went with something I knew, and I did this kind of minimal style. So what I've gotten a good amount of inquiries for tattoo work after that because it's something that apparently is unique and stuff like that. So this guy approached me with, sorry, I'm getting a little spaced out. So this guy approached me and wanted, and I can't say the word of it because it's vulgar, that sounded weird, because I can't pronounce it. But basically, Buddhist moonstone. And it goes in front of Buddhist temples. And I knew a lot about it, a lot more when I was designing it, because these tattoos are projects that obviously take a lot of time. They're not something that's rushed or anything like that. But he approached me with, you know, basically a bunch of Google images of like, this is what I want, and I want you to just take your kind of interpretation of it. It doesn't have to be verbatim of this moonstone, but you know, I should be able to recognize it. And because this is a personal work for him, I knew I had some leeway. He liked my style, but I also knew that the image, which I'll show you what it was pretty dang intricate. and I'll share my screen and show you what he showed me, what he wanted, kind of how I approached it. But whoa, um, he came to me with this, which is obviously a fairly intricate style, or
Yeah.
not style even.
Let's take a moment and think about that, right? Like, he's known for doing mono-weight, stroke-based tattoos that are simple and minimal. And this guy's like, your style's gonna be perfect for a tattoo with 35 ducks and like every animal in Africa and more filigree than King Henry's like throne room, right? So like, as briefs go, that's one of the more difficult ones to wrap your mind around. Like, hey, I want you to take this incredibly complex thing and do you on it. Like, which is like not super hard unless what you do is make simple, like really interesting and impactful images. So like, as we're going through this, remember that there's a tiger or a lion, excuse me, and there's like ducks and there's plants and there's all of this sort of embellishment, and there's elephants, right? Elephants.
Yeah.
And like all of the animal kingdom, right? Like this is Ark on a, like Noah's Ark on a disc, and make it simple. So
and make it simple and put it on my wrist or
Yeah.
on my forearm, which is
right.
3 inches in diameter. It's not a terrible, and knowing what little we know about tattoos, right, is like they bleed and they can't be super, super intricate in line because they start bleeding into each other. So it's a difficult canvas to design for.
Yeah, that's an important part. Like, I have the biggest wrist I've ever seen, and it's 9.5 inches all the way around, right? And that's enormous. And that means that this side is like 3.5 inches wide. So this needs to fit on a 3.5 inch wide surface and read as this while being minimal. And so, like, as icons or simplification projects go, if someone came to me with that, I would just not respond to their email. I'm just like, I don't know what this person wants. You already have an image. Use threshold to take it to your tattoo place. Anyway, sorry.
So yeah, so it was definitely, you know, the thing that caught me, and the thing that always catches me with tattoo design is like someone comes to me with a really close to heart thing that they want, and they want to spend time on it, and they want me to really help them and, you know, figure out how we're going to do it. I would say I turned down 9 out of 10 tattoo inquiries. I try to kind of keep them sacred and keep them, you know, working hard on them and all that stuff. So he came to me with a really motivating story and why he wanted it, and seemed like a, you know, sharp, intelligent guy and understood all the implications that tattoo design come with. And he was ready to pay. So, knowing all of what he wanted, I talked to him for a while. I spoke with him for like an hour, just asking him, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And one thing he mentioned was, don't judge me on my spelling. Yes, I got it. Was Picasso's bowl, which is basically just like, he just said this, and I knew, like, all right, cool. And that's basically, you know, Picasso's bowl of, you know, just really pulling it down to the bare essentials of what it is. And if you go from point A to point Z, it's pretty shocking. But if you go every step in between, you realize, like, oh, all right, you can get a bowl out of like 6 lines and like some dirt. So once he said that, I knew, like, all right, this guy's at least down with the idea that this can happen. So I started sketching. This is a really good example of, let's see, no spoilers. But like what I started doing was I started with an elephant. First thing was, like, I asked him, like, can we ditch some of the animals? Like, do we, like, how verbatim does it need to be? And he was very open to, like, not that verbatim. He was like, we can get rid of an animal if you want. He's like, basically what he came with was like, I just want something that reminds me of this thing as closely as possible. And so it's like, all right, well, we can ditch some of the animals, we can ditch some of the things, we can, you know, really strip it down to what the essentials of it all are. So we took this whole big thing, which is, we turned that into an icon by breaking the content of it down. And then we took each icon inside of that and broke that down into an icon of, like, how few shapes can we do to make these animals and stuff. So, like, for example, this is the elephant. I just sketched it a bunch of times. I didn't even know how to draw an elephant at the time, so I just drew it a bunch. I drew it intricate, I drew it cute, I drew it sharp, I drew it all these different ways. Lots and lots and lots of sketching. This is probably one of 5 pages or so. I sketched the general idea of how it's going to be laid out, like how am I going to get away with doing this thing, how many of these elements am I going to have on here, and keep in mind this is like, it looks like most of an 8 by 10, so like I'm already at like 8 inches wide, like it's too big and it's already getting like pretty tight. Exploring styles of like, what am I going to do for all this foliage? I need to break that down into be simple. Can foliage just be like 3 lines and some dots? Like, will that still get the point across? Because, I know that he's going to know what it is, but also at the same time, like, I want it to still resemble it. I don't want to just give him like 3 circles and be like, you know what it is, dude, just go get this tattooed on you. So, I explored like a lot of like, what can I get away with? Basically, the idea was like, what can I get away with, and people still think it is something. So yeah, I went with these like lotus leaves and an elephant, and there was like a cow at one point. This was the lion that, again, like I just like drew what a lion was and like saw like, all right, there's like some nice shapes in certain things. Like obviously the mane or whatever is going to be huge. Maybe we can do some spiraling stuff with the mane. We can do a number of things, like what's the structure? Does it need to be standing? Should it lay down? Should it, all these different things. Can we kind of draw a mane really simply with that? And so again, just like sketching for hours, really, and because the budget was on point, and because I knew I could spend a good amount of hours on it, I knew I could just like really drill through each thing. And because it's going to be on this guy's skin for the rest of his life, then like, I can take the time to do it right. So I actually think I sent this off to the client. And again, because like I work in a very personal style with my clients, in that I generally don't work with huge bigwigs. And if I do, I usually won't like it, because I like working with people that want to work with me. And if they come back to me and they're like, hey man, just do your thing, don't show me anything, I don't want to see it until it's done, that's fine too. But best case, it's like we can work on this together, and they won't micromanage me. They won't tell me like, oh, you should change that line or anything like that, because they generally, trust my, my expertise or whatever. But so I came to him with this, and I was like, all right, man, here's some lions. Like, what do you think? And like, this one's angry, this one's cuter, all that stuff. And that's when he came back and he's like, I don't like this lion because it's too much. It's not showing, what a lion really is to me, and it's not docile enough and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's cool. I hate it too. So I was like, let's go with, and he was like, I don't like eyeballs because like that's weird. I don't want eyeballs on my arm, stuff like that. So we just, but he liked this. Generally, he really loved this left and right lion. So I said, all right, cool. Well, now I have it. At least I know, like, and that's like a big sigh of relief of like, oh, dude, thank goodness. Like, at least this guy is gonna be into like something I do. Because when you send that first thing out, especially for something like a tattoo or a big project, you're like, oh my god, he's gonna hate it. And he's gonna be like, why? What do you? Did you even listen to what I was saying? And he's gonna be like, you're an idiot. So it's really stressful. And so for him just to be like, yeah, this is cool, spot on. You're like, all right, permission to like continue. And so I like kept kind of going with it. Like, I went, kept breaking it down a little bit simpler, got rid of the eyeballs, moved the ears outside, drew a couple different horses, went with a few different elephants, went with some different foliage styles, like what could we do? And these are all just like really independent elements. And like I was not, truth be told, I didn't do a great job of like thinking about composition yet. I knew it was going to be in a circle. I understood it because I was copying the JPEGs so closely, but I was just hoping that like I was going to be able to warp these things into a circle, and kind of like get them in place and then and redesign them around that. So I was just making like simple elements of like crops and all different flowers and different weird shapes that might resemble floral patterns, stuff like that. I think I have another sketch real quick before I go too far into it. Yeah, so like seriously sketching like a lot. Like I sketched a really lot. Oops, hold on. Yeah. So like sketching a ton. everything. And this is like a lot of these look familiar because it was a matter of like just taking an iPhone photo and like iMessaging it over to myself and then just like retracing it with a Wacom Cintiq and kind of like taking out some lines, being able to erase more freely, figuring out like what horse looks like and what a horse is. Never heard of a horse until I started working on this. So stuff like that. So more sketches, more sketches, more sketches, more sketches. And then kind of brought these animals a little bit, you know, simpler. And he was like, oh, I like this elephant. I just think it should be a little bit more round. And he was always like, get rid of the detail, get rid of the detail, get rid of the detail. To a point of like, even I wanted a little bit more detail. But so I would push back and be like, oh, I think it needs a little bit more, a little bit less. And we worked together a lot and worked closely with like feedback and ended up somewhere towards the end, which was, yeah. So we went here, we started getting it in place, and we're like, oh, cool, like this might actually work. The idea of the center ring, so is basically nirvana, which essentially is, you know, very difficult to draw because it's nothing. It's just reaching, you know, ultimate peace internally. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe there's like a little bit of something in there. And then I was like, nah, it should be completely empty. But I didn't want to like cheap out and be like, oh, I didn't design your nirvana, dude. I just, you know, but it really is nothing. So like I had like a kind of dotted star of like, you know, you've made it to the middle type thing, and just kept playing with it. Then, interestingly, like we brought it to the tattoo artist because I don't actually do the tattooing. I just give the designs over. And the tattoo artist was like, this is too heavy for me. Like, it's going to be too intricate. Like, a lot of this stuff is going to bleed. And so even keeping that in mind when I was designing it, I found out, like, all right, this is going to be too much for the tattoo artist to do. It's going to look like crap, and that's the last thing I want. So, like, what we did was we, like, pulled it back further. And we got rid of some more elements and gave him a couple different types. Showed him all this stuff. And, like, going back to, like, the iconic stuff, like, I tried to represent, like, this lotus flower with just, like, 6 ripples, or... yeah, 6 ripples, and I think it does a decent job of like showing that flower, that lotus petals, without being overly obvious at all. In fact, it's pretty discreet. And I think what we ended up coming up with basically was this guy right here, and then we ended up having it finish right here. And so that's that. So we went there, and you know, we had the photo taken next to it, and that's a lot of like why I want to work with people that are nice and that enjoy what I do, is because like I get a photo like this, which is obviously like the best case scenario, and you can see like it came out good. Like it's a little raised and swollen because it was brand new, but in general, like there's not much bleeding going on at all. It's a good thing we cut back further. It's a good thing we didn't do all 40 animals around. It's a good thing we didn't even do like 2 separate layers of animals, like because the whole idea is like the animals alternate. So that's all we were going to do, was just like make sure there's animals that alternate and make sure there's some floral somewhere in between it. And so it was really good that we cut it back, because if we went too intricate with it, at least for my capabilities, he would have like just a messy black blob on his wrist. So that's that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for showing us literally everything. When we were talking about this, Kirk was like, well, what should I show? Like, I don't want to, I'm like, everything. We're going to show everything you've done. But I think that this is a really cool one to end on, because, like, that it's like a lion, and it's made of 5 lines, right? Uh-oh. There you are. Like, the horse and the elephant are really, like, simple. Like, the whole thing ends up being, like, so reduced. Like, and to talk about process, if I'm like, hey, man, I want a simple lion that's like this moonstone, and you like just gave me your first idea, like no one thinks of that out of the gate. No one's like, oh, I'm gonna make a whirlpool mane, and it's gonna be like 8 lines, and when it's done, it's gonna fit really well with a 6 ripple line lotus, and you're gonna like feel really good about it. Like those ideas aren't birthed whole in your mind, right, at the onset of a project, and if they are, like you should go and just work right now, like just go. Like, that to me is really why I wanted to have Kirk talk to you guys, is like, at the end of it, that dude is like so stoked. And I know it's a tattoo, and it's not something we're going to do. It's not a website, right? We're in a website design class. But like the idea of really iterating until you succeed, until you really get to the essence and the aim of a project, the design project of any sort, whether it's a tattoo or, you know, enterprise software is cutting extraneous details, right? It's looking past your own tastes. It's trying to find why the thing needs to exist in the first place, and less about how you do it, more about why it's being done. And that's what you end up with as a result, that, like, if you were to put those things in two ledger columns, they wouldn't look like the same thing, right? When that guy's holding his arm up in front of the actual stone, you can see, like, the parallels, right? You can see how they relate, and you can see why it was a successful tattoo. You can also see that that guy's forearm is about half the size of my wrist, so that's like just a fun aside. But do you guys have any questions? Right, we've got like the futures now. We've got this whole like long distance thing, right? So ask your question from 3,000 miles away.
Well, first of all, did you design the fun album cover?
No, I wish. That was before. I didn't even realize how amazing that was because I wasn't even in design yet. And then retroactively, I was like, wow, that's a good-looking album cover.
It is like the second best thing on the wall there, because I don't know if you guys can see Larry Bird down here, number 33. Yeah, that is far and away the nicest thing on his wall.
Designed by your professor, truly.
What programs do you use for animation?
For animation, I use After Effects. A lot of stuff basically goes pencil and pen first, even if it's going to be animated. Just drawing out like the general frame by frame by frame to get an idea. Take an iPhone photo, send it over to iMessage or email it to myself. Get it in Photoshop, trace over my sketches, bring those crummy sketches from Photoshop into Illustrator, start tracing all of those shapes and really get all that detail in there, and usually that's kind of that final still, and then if I'm going to make it move, then it goes into After Effects, and things start moving around in After Effects.
Real quick, your degree is in computer science, right?
Yes.
And all of the stuff that you've learned to do on your own?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So the After Effects stuff, like the motion stuff he does, is like sort of the result of doing a bunch of like tutorial and self-initiated discovery stuff, and then kind of combining those styles. And we didn't look at Blueconic. We talked about it briefly, but the animations he did for that are really like fairly involved.
Yeah.
In fact, Kirk and I met in a Skillshare class where we were trying to learn how, in Illustrator, we both happened to really enjoy achieved like certain looks. So for any of you who are like, oh, this is going to take forever, like, no, this is so hard. It is, and it will, but you can do it on your own, and you can do it fairly affordably as long as you're really diligent and like into it. So like, yeah, this is a guy that doesn't do tons and tons of motion, but who made a point of learning how to do it. Like all of these animations, and they're much smoother when it's not on projector and loading over Hangouts. But I definitely encourage you to look at them, just because these are things that, especially for folks like Sam, for example, who like learn to muse, like this kind of stuff, you can make small progress really rapidly and really acquire a skill set in. It's been like what, a year and some change, maybe.
Yeah.
And like can charge real money to do animations. It's also kind of fun to like make your stuff come to life. But anyway, After Effects, right?
Yeah, After Effects, and like totally self-taught, so to speak. Of like, I mean, self-taught's not self-taught anymore, right? Because you have the internet, so it's like I'm internet taught. I'm taught by like Skillshare. I'm taught by like my peers. I'm taught, like, I've learned like so much from this guy. I've learned so much from like people being kind and people being nice and asking questions and Googling things. But yeah, I mean, my degree is so far from art. It's like, I almost had a minor in mathematics, and it's all science-based and logic-based. But I just kind of figured out that like I like organizing things. I like the way things look. I like making things pretty. And then I realized like I like comic books and cartoons and stuff like that, and didn't realize like you can make a living doing that. So just Googling things, YouTube, and like Skillshare, and you just like learn anything very quickly.
Who else? Just Sam. Sam's the only one that's curious.
So you mentioned using the Wacom and stuff like that. So when you do your sketching, you pretty much just, like you said, go into Photoshop, bring in your picture of a hand sketch, and then you start knocking that out of Photoshop with the Wacom before you start doing pen tool, or how do you?
Yeah, so process is something that like I I've like really refined a lot because of the computer science background. So like, you know, you learn that like you make a computer to your slave essentially, and it does whatever you want it to do. So for me, what I found best is it depends on the time, and it depends on how quickly you have to get something done, or how important it is, or non-important it is, or how confident you are. But most of the time, you know, best case scenario, it's like sketching, pencil. You know, I do like the blue and red pencils together, then trace that. You know, go over that with a pen. Then yeah, Photoshop. And I say photo, I mean iPhone image. Photoshop, and then start tracing if I want to. That kind of weeds out. It smooths out those lines, it weeds out the lines, and kind of makes things a little bit more clear of where I'm going to be tracing, what shapes I'm going to be doing. It also helps me realize like when you're sketching in Photoshop, it helps you see the apparent shapes. Like, oh, like turns out a lion's head is really just a circle with 2 ears, or whatever it is, right? Like, or a pumpkin's just a circle, but you stretch it out, or something like that. So that helps you make those more apparent. And then once you bring it into Illustrator, like pen tool is, truth be told, for a lot of the stuff that I showed you, a lot of those icons and a lot of the clean style, like I don't use pen tool too much. I use a lot of shapes, if possible. If I can make something with 2 shapes combined with Pathfinder and stuff like that, I would much rather do that, because I know the mathematics behind it is going to be like very sound, and everything's going to be symmetrical, and if it suits that need, and you know, depending on the style and all that stuff, I'll use pen tool or whatever. But yeah, it goes Photoshop first, then Illustrator.
Awesome. Anyone else? It probably means that I interrupted you like way too many times to explain things, but well, I guess we'll let you go, right? It's almost 11:30 back there.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing to do. I could just learn from you guys. You turn me around and.
I'll point you at me writing HTML on the board, which just happened. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us, dude. I really appreciate it. I know it's super weird to have your head like 6 feet tall in front of a bunch of strangers across the country and talking to yourself more or less for, you know, an hour and some change. So I really appreciate the insight. I think you guys probably got a ton out of it. So I hope that you enjoyed having them. I'll give you guys his site later so you can take a look at some of the work if you want. And yeah, definitely worth buying some things from his store. I feel like I have to say that, right? Like, I didn't pay you to be here, and your time is expensive.
No.
He does sell quality goods if you need any.
No way. I appreciate you guys not heckling me or anything like that. That's payment enough.
Yeah, well, it's Arizona, not Boston, so people aren't just going to yell at you for no reason. They might shoot you, though. But, thanks, dude. Have a good night. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.